Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I am so excited to introduce to you today's guest. He is a biophysicist and research scientist at the Resonance Science Foundation, where he performs theoretical development and experimental research to better understand the physics of complex, self-organizing systems, particularly the biological system. Within the theoretical purview, this has revealed important new insights into the processes of biogenesis, evolution, biological intelligence, and consciousness. In experimental and applied domains, this has potential applications in new health and wellness, technology, manufacturing, and agriculture. He has worked in numerous laboratories across the country and has an extensive background in genetic and neurobiological research and theory. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in cellular and molecular biology from Northern Arizona University and a Master of Science degree in applied recombinant DNA technology from New York University, where he worked at the NYU Langone Medical Center performing research on epigenetic regulation within the human transcriptome. Additionally, he performed 2 years of graduate research at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where he performed research in a variety of areas, including neuromorphogenesis, epigenetics, stem cell regulation, and more. He is passionate about learning and considers that as a fundamental aspect of his work and life. His primary objective is to bring forth new ideas and technologies to assist humanity and advance civilization. Welcome to the show, William Brown. What is up, man?
What's up? Thank you, Matthew. It's great to be on the show with you.
You know, I don't know if anyone will believe this, but I actually shortened that a little bit. Your work and what you've done, it's really a mouthful. I actually practiced it a few times before I read it, so it wasn't perfect, but I'm glad I got it out. You have done such a tremendous amount of work. You have an incredible background. I only kind of understood half of what I read. I'm just wondering if you could, start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, how you got into studying this type of science, how you got into the Resonance Academy, because I know they're a little bit different than traditional academic science institutions, and yeah, we'll take it from there, and we'll dive into some interesting stuff you've been working on.
Awesome. Sounds great. Yeah. So I started off my kind of scientific career, if you could call it that, just out of plain curiosity. I just like to learn about stuff. So I never really had, anyways, any intention to really take it anywhere. I just would investigate things that were I found interesting and curious, and I had kind of grown up learning about astronomy uh, and physics, and so when I got to like the college classes, uh, I would go to the classes and wouldn't really learn much new in those areas. So it wasn't really stimulating for me. But I went to like the biology class and I didn't know hardly anything. And so, that's where I went because I wanted to learn about this world that I didn't know about. I'd kind of studied the large macro scale, but here was this whole other universe inside of us, the living universe that I knew virtually nothing about. So, it was just extremely exciting to learn about. So I eventually got into the micro fine details of that, so the molecular biology. Um, but I was very much your classical conventional scientist. In that I didn't really believe in anything that couldn't be like measured and observed in some way. So, to me, what was in the canon of science was all there was. In kind of my early studies, early on, uh, eventually, I became very interested in how we might be able to use this understanding within molecular biology. How the brain functions, how the brain works, how uh, the genetic machinery, the structure and function of the genome works, to be able to do things like extend lifespan. Create drastically longer, healthier human lifespans, as well as you know better understand the elements engendering cognition and sentience, and be able to reverse engineer that for augmenting human intelligence, usually through some form of artificial intelligence. And so that uh, got me into my graduate work at NYU, where I actually started to learn the techniques that would be used in doing that. Extending human lifespan. Augmenting the genetic expression to optimize it. Learning about how the brain forms and how correlates of cognition arise. But so kind of around that same time, as that kind of conventional materialist kind of scientist, I started to want to investigate some of these things that seem very mystical. Meditation, yoga. There's oneness of consciousness, there's oneness of being, and so it wasn't that I was outright opposed and closed off to it. It's just that if I couldn't have some kind of experience of it, if I couldn't have some kind of measurable, observable, almost quantifiable experience of what they're talking about, then I'd have to assume that it is not really substantive, that it's just wishful thinking or something. But so I took it seriously. I learned some meditation practices, some yoga practices, some of the philosophy behind it. The oneness, consciousness, etc. Applied it, and in my mind, in a rigorous, methodological, scientific manner. And many of the things that were claimed, I found I experienced. So it was like uh, deep states of feelings of oneness, and feelings that my being was very expansive, that it wasn't necessarily limited to the uh, quote unquote physical body, so to speak. So these kind of things, I had very visceral, objective experiences of these. Of course, subjective in the sense that I can't go and show anybody charts and graphs of it, but it was enough to convince me that I was wrong in some of my attitude towards this. And actually, that kind of opened up an entire avenue of scientific investigation, because, uh, in my mind, you could take one of two uh, views of this. One is that, okay, these are mystical experiences that are supernatural and beyond scientific explanation. Or two, maybe they certainly are mystical experiences, and they don't just happen. Uh, if you're just sitting around not doing much, they're kind of esoteric in that sense. But that perhaps there is a naturalistic aspect to them, and they can be understood within the scientific purview. And actually, maybe they could advance some of our scientific understanding, because in my mind, I'm experiencing these things. Uh, so they're real to me. So it must have some kind of natural function, in some kind of natural relevance to the physical world. And so, that kind of came into play as a guiding uh, uh, experience, because in science, you draw from experience as much as you draw from that objective, linear based quantification, unbiased measurement and everything. You also use your personal experiences that kind of give you some degree of insight into some of the natural dynamics and mechanics of the world in a scientific kind of perspective. So um, I essentially then uh, began to look at how those kind of states, that kind of phenomena, might be explained via physical, scientific based mechanisms. And so, I had been doing pretty extensive work, pretty extensive research into the molecular biology. So, I had been looking at how the brain forms. I mean, even so neuromorphogenesis. I was looking at the formation of central nervous systems in progenitor organisms that don't really have neurons, don't really have well-defined nervous systems, but they have cells and definitely genes that are similar to what you find in complex animals, animals with a complex central nervous system and brain, like humans. So, I was looking at how this information processing apparatus of the living system uh, emerges, develops, and what appears to be some of its functioning. And it was readily apparent that there is no really solid explanation for some of these most central things within the biological sciences. So, for instance, the emergence of cognition, particularly awareness, or the kind of awareness that is of an agent, so uh, a being with standalone volition, the kind of entity that has goal-oriented behavior. So where does that kind of awareness arise? You're not going to find a good explanation for that in the neurocomputational model. The conventional neuromorphogenesis and form and function of the brain. In fact, it kind of argues against there even being the possibility of free will, agents with standalone volition, goal-oriented behavior, free will. So, the conventional scientific paradigm in that respect uh, seems to argue that there is no consciousness, no real awareness. It's an artifact, an illusion. But then as well, going to the genes, what about the formation of form and structure? So that is a very important, if not central, feature of the living system, the biological system, is that it adopts very specific forms. You can see that certainly with the body, which determines uh, every kind of interaction you have with the environment. But even down to the molecular level, the very specific forms of the DNA, of the proteins it produces, of the cells, the cellular architecture, all of these things. Uh, Again, none of that is directly encoded in the DNA. Again, contrary to what is kind of stated, that, the DNA is the blueprint, so we know that's where, form and function comes from. It's not directly coded in that, so there's still this open question of morphogenesis, form and function. Now, so these are kind of biological questions, but actually, if you start getting into them, they are deeply interrelated with other fields, other scientific disciplines, such as chemistry, organic chemistry, biochemistry, certainly physics. So um, what kind of physics are involved in the generation of consciousness and morphogenesis, or even conversely, does consciousness play a role in the physical universe? Does it have an effect on our physical universe? Um, so as well as so it brings together kind of a number of different fields of science, information theory, quantum mechanics, and ultimately where it took me was unified physics. Particularly the unified physics of Nassim Haramein, physicist Nassim Haramein. So that's kind of where I think it starts getting more interesting for the average person. All of that stuff is maybe kind of like eyes glazing over a little bit, like But I think that from there, once you start looking at uh, aspects of unified physics in the development and expression of complex self-organizing systems, it starts to get into some very interesting um, phenomena.
Amazing, brother. I was sitting listening and just like, okay, absorbing what you're saying, taking a few notes. I'm like, okay, I've got a question here, got a question there. Um, you obviously have a very unique way of understanding the world, a really interesting background. I like this scientific approach where, well, personally, I never did. I didn't like, you had to see it to prove it, right? For me, I was the complete opposite. I had like a feeling. Now, it might not have been right or wrong, but that's how I operated. I operated in the meditation space and things like that. But what I do love about your approach and what you're doing is you came from that and now you're using both, and that's really all I wanted. Was like, okay, let's measure what we can, let's prove what we can, but also there's so much that we can't see and we can't prove it, that is so far beyond us. We're very young species, there's a lot we don't know. And when you sent me, because I'm looking at your background and I'm going through the Resonance Academy right now, and I understand it's so far beyond me. So I'm reading the articles you sent me, which are on vacuum structure, space-time geometry, and quantum mechanics, holographic information network, which you said that's the easier form. What did you say the other word was for it?
The holographic infodynamic nexus.
Right. Right. So you're like, okay, so you're reading these, but now for me in my work and what I've done, it's been a lot of that self, go in, experience these states, consciousness. But now I'm getting way more curious about the science and what's happening. So, there's a lot of different ways that we could go with this. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that in-depth background and where you are today, coming with unified physics and biology, because that root of having that scientific approach to things is really what's going to take us, that scientific approach with an open-mindedness, with the ability to rethink and retest and also follow our gut, follow our intuition, go in, then prove it kind of thing, So when we're getting into unified physics and what you're doing with Nassim Haramein, for people listening, what for you is most exciting that you're working on, how your work is bridging the gap, or if of those things that I spoke of, like vacuum structure, space-time geometry, and quantum mechanics, actually the holographic information network was super interesting. And that's, if I'll just say the easiest way that I understand it, but it's kind of like, the oneness as a wave, like we're interconnected. It's the space between is this connected network. if that's the layman's version. And you're proving that now scientifically with geometry and things like that. So of that rant, what do you want to kind of like tackle or go forward with?
Yeah, yeah. It's difficult because there's a lot of exciting stuff that has been developing and that we've been working on. But I actually like where you're going, focusing on the holographic information network, and that was a very straightforward, uh, concise way to explain this idea. Um, so uh, because this is actually probably the best starting point to kind of get into this kind of topic, is to start with the concept of nothing, and perhaps the most basic and elemental nothingness that we can conceive of, space, empty space. So uh, probably the most fundamental characters in any science, in physics, is space and time. Well, now you can begin to start to ask, okay, what is the nature of space? What is the nature of time? Of course, we have this kind of classical notion that these are just uh, empty arenas in which physical events take place, but they're inert arenas, in that they don't influence necessarily the events that are occurring within that theater of space and time, other than perhaps ordering where things take place in their causal structure. But if you start to look at more uh, modern understandings of space and time, you start to look at what measurements and observations are saying about the nature of space, and what kind of theoretical developments are occurring around the concept of space. Uh, it becomes a very different character in this play. It's no longer just the inert theater in which things take place. Uh, it becomes a dynamic and key player. So um, you start to look at space, and you start to realize this is the one thing that connects all things. Uh, because you look around, you see matter, uh, air, etc., and we know that's these particle-like things. But then you start to ask, okay, what is matter? What are we made of? What is the stuff around us made of? Um, well, when measurements are taken, when you probe their structure, uh, they're like 99.9999% empty space. An atom is, because you got a nucleus and an electron orbital, and most of that is empty space. And then you talk about molecules, mostly empty space, and that's what we're made out of. So everything is mostly empty space. There seems to be this small quantum of action, this quantum harmonic oscillator frequency that's in there that we can see as like energy, as like substance. Of course, that's just a field that you're pushing against, an electromagnetic field. So there's some kind of energetic thing happening there, but it's mostly space. Well, so space is one thing that connects all things, but then uh, you kind of go down that rabbit hole a little further, looking at the structure and perhaps energetic structure of space. So we have our understanding of matter, these kind of like little quantum harmonic oscillator, these frequency packets of energy. Uh, well, then you start to look at them from quantum field theory, and they're no longer really isolated to any one specific place or time, for that matter. They're kind of everywhere. uh, True to the name, quantum field theory, they become field-like. So now you do a calculation of space as being full of these fields, these quantum fields, uh, and you do a very basic calculation. Okay, following the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, anything below this certain size is going to have energy in there. So that's called the 0 point energy, because it's always there. Uh, and so, for instance, one of the reasons this is that you can never go to like absolute zero. At absolute zero, all motion would stop. Well, you can't ever get to absolute zero. They've taken it to like billionths of a degree above absolute zero. But you just can't really hit that absolute 0 point because there's always a certain amount of energy uh, uh, in these quantum fields. So now you can actually calculate how much energy should be there. So you can observe. Okay, you try to go down to absolute zero, you can't because there's a 0 point. The 0 point has energetic quantum fluctuations, quantum harmonic oscillations. Okay, so the energy you can calculate, it's this much, uh, occupying this much size. So you can calculate a energy density. You do that calculation, and you get something like 10 to the 111 joules per cubic meter. Okay, so that's just a number, right? uh, well, there's a mass energy equivalence. So that's something like 10 to the uh, 95 grams per cubic centimeter. If you were to take all the mass energy of the observable universe, which you can get a pretty good estimate of it, there's ways you could get a good approximation of the total mass energy of the universe. Uh, it comes out to about 10 to the 50 grams total. Now, that's the entire observable universe, about 10 to the 50 grams. You look at a cubic centimeter of this 0 point energy, this vacuum energy, is 10 to the 95 grams. Now, I'm giving that in a mass energy equivalence. So that's also uh, uh, expressed as joules or some other form of energy. But a cubic centimeter, when you do this calculation from quantum field theory on how much energy is in the vacuum, you surpass the total energy of the observable universe by several orders of magnitude. So this is pretty astounding. But perhaps in retrospect, not so astounding. There was, if you would have followed some lines of thought, even going back to the 19th century, on like the luminiferous ether, vortex ideas of matter, uh, etc., there might be some indication that there is indeed a energetic structure to space, a substantive structure, non-trivial, in fact. But that's the thing is that when this kind of calculation is done, I mean, it's astounding. And actually, the values I'm getting are what's called a renormalized value, where you actually use particular constraints on those 0 point fluctuations. Like they can't have, they can't just go smaller and smaller ad infinitum. You have like a cutoff value, because if you don't have that cutoff value, it's an infinite energy density. We're in a sea of infinite energy. Um, well, now, so to this day, actually, literally, this day, I was in an argument with a physicist about this. There's this idea that, well, no rational scientist takes this calculation seriously. This was the argument I said, and I was like, well, you say that, but you're categorically incorrect in that statement, because actually, one of the preeminent physicists of the 20th century, John Archibald Wheeler, took it very seriously. He was one of the first university-based physicists to really go into general relativity. So, Einstein had formulated his theory of general relativity back in the 1930s, and this is almost 20 years later that a professor for the first time is really going into teaching like graduate courses in general relativity. It wasn't really taught that widespread in the universities. This is John Archibald Wheeler, who worked under Einstein. He worked with almost every important physicist of the 20th century. But so he's got a profound understanding of general relativity. Uh, he's making seminal contributions to quantum field theory. He sees this value of the vacuum energy expectation value. And he was not one of those scientists that is just going to push something strange under the rug and ignore it, or say, oh, well, this is obviously not a real physical correlate to anything, the math is wrong somewhere or something. Well, he takes that and says, oh, okay, what does this mean? Well, you've got this extremely high value, energy architecture of space, of the vacuum. And he looks at, okay, these quantum fields are doing these extremely, he used the word like violent fluctuations at the smallest scales, at the Planck scale. So this is unobservable. You can't really directly observe this scale. In some ways you can, but it's often called the micro scale because it's difficult to see what's occurring in this realm. It's so small. Well, the energy of these quantum fluctuations are so great that they would curve space-time following Einstein's general relativity. Wherever you have energy, be it mass or like electromagnetic energy, that changes the geometry of space-time. It changes the geometry of space. So these quantum fluctuations are so strong that they're going to curve the micro scale of space to such a high degree that it becomes almost infinitely curved. That the geometry begins to become like so highly curved that you get a multiply connected geometry. Now, so let's give an example of that. a black hole. So you've got a collection of matter like a star, but you've got a lot of it. So like 10 stars, like 10 of our suns, uh, you start to uh, uh, lose the outward pressure, the outward energetic pressure that's holding this thing up, uh, ostensibly through thermonuclear fusion. It starts to collapse in on itself. As it gets smaller and smaller, what you could see with the space-time geometry is it becomes more and more curved until the equations describing this kind of uh, uh, um, break, and it looks like what you get is like a hole in space-time because it comes so curved that it just infinitely curves. But when that occurs, what you can oftentimes see is that that curvature actually goes like kind of into hyperspace and connects with another space-time region. What you now have is a wormhole. So John Archibald Wheeler is looking at these quantum fluctuations at the small scale. They're curving space-time the same way a black hole does. But it's these extremely rapid fluctuations, oscillations. So they're kind of like coming in and out extremely rapidly. But what you're having is the formation of all of these wormholes, just an innumerable amount of these multiply connected wormhole architecture. So he called it quantum space-time foam. We've kind of taken this idea and developed it a little bit further. We call it, like, for instance, the Planckian micro wormhole network, or more simplistically, even the unified space memory network, because when you're looking, you can't really directly see at this scale, but at this extremely small scale, space is multiply connected. Now this means that spatial regions that aren't normally defined as being causally connected are connected. Temporal domains, points in time that aren't normally considered as being causally connected are connected. So it's this vast connected network. And that's where I start to throw in descriptive terms like the infodynamic nexus, the unified space memory nexus, because this realm, this scale, is the source of all entanglement. It's the source where everything is connected. But so you can begin to see how investigating space, the nature of space, tells you everything is connected. So we start to say, it's the connected universe.
Wow, man. Okay. So, oh my God. Again, it goes like to Star Trek. My mind is going to Star Trek and like Outer Limits. And I can't remember what show it was, but this guy basically goes through infinite realities trying to find his home. He like gets sucked into a wormhole, and he always, when he goes to a new world, he checks the gate of his front door or something to see if it's his universe. Like that's where my mind goes when you're saying all that stuff. So kind of the way that I've wrapped my head around what I've looked at Nassim's work and the Resonance Academy is traditionally physics and science, they've the Big Bang and like everything's going out and expanding, and that's what they're measuring. but Nassim is also considering everything going in. He's like, well, if it goes infinitely out, it's kind of got to go infinitely in. And looking at Dan Winter as well, who has been looking into a lot, it's a fractal field theory, and the same idea of the implosion of perfect geometry going in. And so it's kind of like I had a second listen of something today and more clicked in. So let's see how I wrap my head around it. But it's like one piece of geometry, then it gets to a smaller piece of geometry, and it implodes inward perfectly. So it creates inertia, right? And so we're imploding in when we die to create a plasma field to take our memory through death. So then we've got Bruce Lipton, who I'm sure you're aware of, who basically was saying that, it's not our, when you say you have a cancer or this runs in my family or whatever, and he's come up with science saying you actually through your own consciousness turn on and off genes, not the other way around. You actually have that ability with your own consciousness to affect your own genes in your body. So you have the science behind things like this. You can measure it. You're the guy who's in the lab doing things that most of us can't comprehend, including myself. So I'm just making sense of it the best I can. So I guess my question, and I'll kind of just rant a little bit, and you can kind of pick at what you want to pursue. But with your research and what you're working on, what does it suggest about the evolution of consciousness, or how we can apply it in terms of our own lives, freedom, building the new earth, technologies, if like for me to have more freedom and options, or what you see coming down the line as a collective of people, like, hey, look at this discovery, this means we could do this sort of thing. And and yeah, I think that's my main question, because we have these incredible scientists. I think that we're on this verge of a breakthrough, not only with our consciousness, but with technologies, with understanding these things, like wormholes, like creating Star Trek level devices. Do you see that as a real possibility? And what are you most excited about for science coming in, and what's possible and how it's going to affect humanity? And do you see a leap in consciousness, like you said, which can't be measured in the neurons or where exactly the awareness comes from? Do you see it going to another level, and then we're accessing these even deeper realms of science and spirituality and mysticism, and well, mostly just science, because we're talking about science?
Yeah. I think that it's almost critical that it does take us to another level, that we do make that jump to another level, because so through our investigation of the nature of consciousness, what it is, how does it physically relate to the mechanics and dynamics of the world around us, or is it just an epiphenomenological fluke, the brain that doesn't really have any reality or relevance? That kind of common materialistic idea from materialism-based science. It's somewhat of a critical question at this time, just because, in a way, our technology is outpacing our spiritual technology, our spiritual sentience or wisdom. Now, I use that term because it's the best one I can think of, the most appropriate term. Spiritual is kind of a deeper understanding of our place in the universe and our relationship to it, and particularly a greater awareness of the connectivity, the connection, the great connectivity of this world. Well, so the capabilities that are being engendered via our fantastic technological progress, you can look at like the developments taking place in artificial intelligence. Well, soon that artificial intelligence is going to be extremely powerful. Uh, and of course, the classical sci-fi doomsday scenario is that it rises up and overthrows its maker. But I think that even more mundanely, pragmatically, a concern would be the nefarious implementation of the extreme potential power of artificial intelligence, because at the very least, it can do kind of predictive computations, predictive algorithms to such a high degree of sophistication that if you wanted to control certain outcomes, you could use that with um, impressive effectiveness and precision. So um, I really wonder about what's down the road. So in terms of that, but certainly as well in terms of international relationships. You know. Uh, uh, Ecological preservation, the seemingly rapid deterioration of the biosphere, which is, an extreme problem. So that leap to the next realm is kind of critical at this time. And so, certainly I see the developments into the investigation of the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the physical world as a central and pivotal uh, uh, um, endeavor that can facilitate that transition, because you might hear about, well, there's a deeper nature to your being. There's a connection among all things, among all people. Uh, what you think and do has an effect in the world. And it might just sound like wishful thinking, but if you can see where that is demonstrably and empirically uh, um, manifest, you can show it as being integral in scientific investigations in physical processes. It becomes, I think, even a little bit more real in that sense. So, it can be used as a way to facilitate that advancement. Uh, so, uh, in terms of, okay, uh, does consciousness have actual relevant role in, uh, let's say, the universe, in the physical world, or is it just this like kind of ephemeral epiphenomenon? Well, so we in our investigation and delineation of that unified space memory network that I was talking about, uh, we kind of go through a point by point discussion and demonstration of how the elements engendering awareness, and so kind of your basic sentience, is sourced in this fundamental field, this fundamental realm. It's kind of actually the source field for uh, information processes, information processes that are sometimes intelligent. So information processes that are going to be associated with awareness and consciousness. Um, so, from our presentation, our argument, our model, Consciousness is not just an epiphenomenon of the brain. In fact, you can't really describe consciousness via that model, as we had mentioned. So if you look at it from this more elemental level, you can actually explain a lot more of the characteristics. The puzzle pieces fit together a lot nicer, and the picture that it comes together when you are able to fit these is that consciousness is an integral and intrinsic dynamic of the physical world. And so you can argue to what degree that is true. Uh, I mean, so some would say, even if they were willing to concede that they would say, well, certainly you don't mean human level consciousness is present everywhere. I do take it that far, just because I know from the physics that what is going on in here is not separate and isolated from what's going on out here. And in fact, due to the nature of this quantum entangled nexus, the multiply connected space-time geometry, what's going on in here is not isolated to any specific space-time, a spatial coordinate or temporal coordinate. So your beingness is a part of the fabric of the universe across space and time. But few, so particularly in the sciences, few would be willing to concede that. That's kind of verboten. You don't go there generally. But at least there are, let's say, proto-conscious phenomena in this information processes of space and matter of this fundamental field, infodynamics. That there are the kind of information processes, memory, communication, processing, information processing. These are all things that are elements engendering awareness and consciousness, and you can see them at the most basic level of the universe. So consciousness has a role, an integral and intrinsic role in the dynamics of the physical world. So we see kind of where it's coming from. It's not just that it's coming from the natural dynamics of the physical world, it's feeding back into those dynamics. You've got constant information feedback that is occurring across a number of different scales, from simple particle to particle interactions to the activity of our brain, our neurological architecture, feeding back information into this dynamic nexus. So you can see this across scales. You can see this in a number of different levels. You can see it in the body, where so the body arises from the same dynamics of this space-time field, the space-time network. So it's going to kind of recapitulate the same dynamics you have. This is what a fractal system is scale-free complexity. So at this mesoscale, the body, the living system is kind of right in the middle between the ultra large and the ultra small. Well, what you see going on at the mesoscale in a fractal system, in a holofractal graphic system, it's occurring at the largest scale and at the smallest scale. So every thought you have, every action you take is being communicated into your cellular system. that your gene expression, the DNA is responding to it. And most of that information transmission is occurring via the plasma membrane. So the membrane structure of the cell, that's kind of where you have the brain of the cell, and hence kind of the brain of the body. Uh, it's receiving all the environmental information, and that environmental information is not only physical things you're experiencing, but also thoughts and emotional states. They all have a physical, chemical, and electromagnetic signature correlate. So that's intimated to the cell, which changes gene expression, which can have uh, extremely profound results. You can become healthier by the things you think and feel, or you can become less healthy. It kind of goes both ways, but it's that information feedback. Well, so Bruce Lipton and many others describe that for the body. Uh, which for me is just like such a central idea to understand is that your body, uh, well, down to the molecular genetic level, is geared to be responsive to the macro state, to what you're thinking, to what you're feeling. It's geared to be responsive to that. That's from a Darwinian perspective, even how survival takes place. Well, so it's happening at the mesoscale in the body. Uh, Consciousness it doesn't stop there. Consciousness feeds into that unified space memory network, that holographic infodynamic nexus. And so the same way that it can influence the body, it can influence the collective consciousness. It can influence uh, larger scale systems or environment, or collective. Of course, that level of information feedback is averaged among a large number of sources of feedback. Your body does the same thing, kind of integrating billions of different inputs into a coherent signal. But, you know, uh, uh, our state can and does influence the evolution of the system. So we have a very direct and substantive role in where we go as a collective. So all of that is going to influence, the harmonious interaction among groups, particularly at the international level. Where you want very harmonious interaction. You don't want hawkish behavior, warmongering and hegemonic domination type stuff going on. That's bad news. So through actions, but also through this kind of state of mind, you can contribute to a more harmonious world, but also feeding back that kind of information that is going to produce an environment that is very beneficial to the generation of novel, innovative ideas. And so, because we kind of have a brain sphere, a sphere of morphic resonance where your attitude, your ideas are feeding into the system. And, if enough of that is occurring, it definitely boosts the probability that any one person is going to have that eureka moment to bring forth, innovative, novel technologies that can, do things like uh, uh, clean, cheap desalinization of ocean water, so that you can provide clean water, non-polluting clean water, novel, innovative energy production technologies, so that you can provide clean, cheap ways of providing energy. So all of these things, and then of course, hopefully, that's coming to me, and I'll come up with a way for like wormhole technology, so that we can teleport Star Trek like across the sky. That might be, once we get like the water and the clean energy and environmental bioremediation, that might be the next step there. But all of those things, we can facilitate and influence.
Man, that was a lot, dude. Again, I'm taking notes. My mind, because like some of it, I'm trying to pay attention to. I'm like, okay, that's thick. I got it. Some of it, it's just expanding new thoughts. So it's definitely a treat to listen to you kind of talk about it, because most people will talk about it as in theory. They'll have this idea in their head, and I have them all the time, and that I have them all the time how I think things are. But you're actually measuring this stuff and proving it, and in there, and then coming to these same conclusions that I'm feeling, which I love. And one of them I really love in that talk is saying that we are constantly getting feedback, that our expression and our experience matters as each individual. And then as we have that experience, actually the whole, the everything, the oneness, all beings are benefiting from that knowledge. One of the ways, I don't know if it was from the Resonance Project or what, but it was the torus, which is essentially a donut. So Google a torus if you've never seen one. But these little tiny balls are like cells or individual consciousness kind of rolling to the outside of the universe and then coming back in as a spinning, effect, a spinning torus. So you're kind of out in the universe doing the thing, and then you come back to the center point, or the oneness, where we're giving that information back, and then we go out kind of like on an adventure trip again, collecting all this information. So maybe when I die, for example, I have, hey, this is like the Matt Belair search that I've done. This is all the stuff and the information I have. Like, oh, William, what did you discover? I'm like, holy crap, man, that's a lot of science. All right, like, whoa. And then we kind of, and everybody grows from that. So really, really fascinating, interesting stuff. I know that you have on the Resonance Project and your website tons of articles and research that is actually, it is a bit dense, but not too bad. Like everything I'm reading is understandable. Some of the words I have to Google because I'm not sure of the science, but once you get through that, it's a very fascinating. And Dr. Joe Dispenza, who wrote You Are the Placebo, talks about, he's friends with Bruce Lipton, but just talks about the more information you have around why you do something, the more you understand it, the more effective it's going to be. So a simple example is like, the more I understand doing a deadlift is going to make me stronger, the more effective it is when I know that exercise. And there's some studies on that, just saying that the more you understand something, the more effect it has. So this in understanding our consciousness and what is possible. But I know that you got to get going. I want to respect your time. I have a million different questions that I want to ask. So I'm just going to, you can answer these quickly, choose whichever one you want, but I'm going to blurt them all out and I'll let you wrap it up however you'd like. But as a scientist, are you optimistic about the future? Do you believe we have free will? Do you believe that we create our own reality? Is there anything that you wish that I had asked you, and what do you want to leave the listeners with? Be sure to give them your email and contact info.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. No. Yeah. Actually, really appreciate where you guided the discussion. I'll maybe a little bit apologetic that I can get kind of long-winded. We could have touched on more subjects, but it's just if there's one thing I like to talk about, it's the things you've brought up. So now I'm not sure how people are gonna like my answers to some of these questions. I personally, I have a little bit of difficulty about being optimistic about the future. You know, I see some serious challenges that we face. Uh, you know, I hope that that's not too much. Just my mind focusing on over focusing on the negative. Because there's definitely a lot of positive stuff out there that we can point to. I mean, just the most people, I would say, uh, are well, at least let's say more and more people are becoming interested in the kind of things that are going to make a difference and bring the world to a better place. Hopefully, kind of correct the course of the ship a little bit to a better heading. Uh, but the challenges are great. I mean, we've got to figure out how to slow down, stop, and remediate the loss of biodiversity that's taking place because at an accelerating pace, we're systematically, collectively, humanity systematically destroying every major life support system on the planet, and it's alarming. Because uh, we need healthy oceans, vibrant forests, and other ecosystems uh, for a healthy and good life. So uh, now there are developments that are encouraging. So particularly technological developments that are encouraging because with every single one of these challenges, there is a smarter way to do things, a more harmonious, synergistic way of doing things. And so, that the intelligence is there in humanity, the will to do it, the passion to do it is there. So I think that one of the challenges we have there is creating a kind of atmosphere, a kind of uh, uh, system in which these intelligent, smart solutions can come out and make an impact, make a difference. So just myriad technologies that can really help make a huge difference. So, I'm not very optimistic, but uh, because I think that we've got our work cut out for us. There's some serious challenges, but there are solutions to it. And it's about what we're willing to take on. And like you were saying, understanding why we do things and certainly understanding the situation will greatly facilitate that. Question of free will, that's a hard one because uh, I don't really think that ultimately we have free will. Uh, and so this is a little bit tricky because I kind of argue against myself on this because I'll say that uh, the defining characteristic of consciousness, of awareness, that's often given as like the Turing test, is something indistinguishable from the answers a human would give if you were questioning it. Well, you can design artificial intelligence system that can mimic the human sufficiently to give all the right answers. And as you know, you can have a human that gives pretty robotic answers, like myself. But so that's not a very good test. The number one way to identify awareness or consciousness is does the system exhibit free will, goal-oriented behavior. Now, this arises from the unpredictability of the system. The system is generating intelligence and awareness in such a way that it's not from a reductionist deterministic algorithm of how the atoms are interacting. If it was like that reductionist clockwork like determinism, you could calculate any potential behavior of a system. Therefore, it would be predictable. Therefore, there wouldn't be free will. But our behavior, our intelligence and consciousness isn't being generated in that way. So it has an unpredictability. We cannot predict the behavior of a human. Fundamentally, in many circumstances you can, uh, because we're kind of creatures of habit and all of that. But that free will is there. Uh, the caveat to that is that I think that with an infinitely large, infinitely intelligent system, you could 100% predict every single thought and action you'll ever take. And so that in that sense, there wouldn't be any free will because everything you'll ever do is already known. And there is just such a system, the universe, the great multiverse, even. It has the capacity to fully know, but you are a part of that though. So there's still kind of free will, but this even gets into the nature of time uh, in the when you start to talk about the timeless realm. Uh, you know, it's not like a linear sequence of events. So how can you have free will decisions if everything happens instantaneously, simultaneously, or in an alternative way of thinking of it, is eternally coexisting, unchanging even. So this is that's a wide-ranging subject, um, but yeah, definitely operationally we have free will. Free will, fundamentally, uh, not so much. Let's
What a
see.
scientific answer. It's just like
Okay.
it's like your brain going with all the things you've looked at in studies like, okay, hold on. I learned this and I learned this, so I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I love
Yeah.
that.
Uh, yeah. That's a that's a deep question. So I'm not committing to an answer.
Fair enough.
This is kind of where my mind goes with it. But I mean, it directly speaks to the nature of consciousness, the nature of being, the ontological nature of the universe. So it's a deep question.
Yeah, I give you like three deep questions before you close it out and expect a short answer. I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
But so I know you got to jump off. I would love to keep and feel free to spout off, but is there just anything that you want to leave the listeners with, and just where they can find out more about your work, the Resonance Academy, and anything that you're up to?
Yeah. So, I have pretty regular posts on the Resonance Science Foundation site, resonance.is. We post articles, brief news commentary on the latest kind of things coming out in way of scientific discoveries and developments in unified physics and other related topics. Um, as well as the Resonance Academy. On the Resonance Academy, we have the delegate course that um, I still do like monthly live calls where delegates, students can ask questions, and we kind of explore the topics around holofractal graphic unified field theory and the connected universe. I'm pretty soon, actually, I think in August, I'm going to be launching an auxiliary course, kind of like an elective course, to go along with the main modules, the main delegate course. And it's going to be going into a lot of the stuff we've kind of talked about, going into it in even more detail. But so I'll have an academy course that will be available for folks who want to check out the Resonance Academy and everything. Um, and I think both of those sites have areas where folks can shoot messages over. I have a Facebook page where if anybody wants to leave a message, comment, question, I'm happy to continue the discourse, the dialogue. So um, I think that those are probably the two major sources to keep up. If people want to keep following the work and see where we're going with it.
Awesome, brother. Yeah, man. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've looked at again. I'm just starting the Resonance Academy. I'm at Module 2. It's been really exciting. Someone again with not. I don't have a big science background, pretty high school science, and so getting into it has been manageable for sure and very very interesting. Taking my spirituality mindset. More like kinesthetic, Eastern style of learning or whatever, martial arts background, whatever I am, I don't even know. But my interests, anyways, into the science realm has made it manageable, really interesting, and almost amplifying stuff that I believed before, but now it's kind of having scientific proof and backing and understanding it more, understanding myself more, and even the universe and what I'm a part of. So, highly recommend everyone check out that, your work and articles, because there's something for everyone, whether you're looking at the holographic universe, dark matter, it's just like space time is super interesting. And we have the ability now to make it understandable. You guys are doing hard science, but it can come back in a way that it is relatable. So definitely encourage people to check that out. So I just want to thank you so much for your time, brother. Thank you for your work and everything that you're up to. I think we're going to Egypt together, so I'm super stoked to go with you and Nassim and the delegates. And we didn't even get into like ancient technologies, and that's a whole week-long discussion there. And all the information that's in those pyramids that's over there that the world is about to realize, hopefully, and coming forth with new technologies. I was going to just add one quick thing about the Earth and us being in this time where it's so important. I would just love to see us like full stop tomorrow. Everybody just works on everything of service to humanity. We go out of this for-profit system into a system that benefits all, that's planet first, that's sustainable. And, we go to a resource-based economy and everybody goes full tilt towards fixing this planet, and we can do it with the technologies, with the intention. We can do it, and that might be our only way. And from a scientific perspective, all your research, it looks pretty daunting. And it's like we got to stop teetering. We really got to take responsibility for what we're doing, how we're putting our energy forth. And so ideally leaders can create opportunities where people can jump on board, and we have an ability to pick up a shovel, so to speak, whatever it is, and make an impact. So the Resonance Academy and people like your work are, I think, soon going to be providing those opportunities in some way, or at least providing research backing for others to stand on and do it. So just wanted to say all that, and appreciate your work and you coming on, brother.
Thank you, Matthew. Yes, it was a great discussion. Really appreciate getting to wrap with you a little bit here. And if I could just second your call to everybody bringing a little bit of extra awareness to making that difference So well said.
Thanks, brother. Well, thanks so much for coming on again, man, and everything. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll catch you in the next episode. Peace, buddy.